He's definitely brutal. He's always savage. And you're definitely getting wrecked.
Okay, this is going to be another episode of Esports Mount Rushmore. And for this episode, we are going to be talking about Quake because we are with Rapha, long-time Quake Dueller, many-time champion, also recently found out friend of Battle Rap, veteran Fresco. Wasn't expecting that one, I can't lie. That did come a bit out of left field even for me.
Yeah. Growing up in the same town, ended up becoming friends randomly, like meeting Lost Cause once at a LAN center. And yeah, no, Anthony's always been a really close friend, and we've talked about esports a lot. So it's cool to find out that you were able to talk to him and to do something with him.
Well, I think his explanation that made it make a lot of sense immediately was he said, like, Rockford's a pretty small place, so, like, everyone knows everyone, basically.
Yeah. It's a really oversized village, honestly. It's like 200,000 some people, but it's so easy to run into people that you know and get to know people, so,
okay.
Yeah.
So I always do this, but just in case this is the first episode of this series someone's watched, I'll very briefly outline the premise here. Because the problem is, the concept, I think it sounds like a cool name, Mount Rushmore, but the downside of that, okay, is when anyone uses that concept in a sports concept, like, you know, the NBA Mount Rushmore or whatever, people will always make the mistake of thinking that means it has to be the 4 best players ever, and whoever you put there is 4. But what's great is, I actually thought about this later, and to be fair, that doesn't even apply to the real Mount Rushmore. You know, there was no vote. No one picked who the 4 best were, and it doesn't mean those 4 guys were the best 4 presidents. So the whole point for me instead is, these are 4 people that someone picks in whatever category. In your case, we're going to do Quake Duel, and these are 4 people where to you they're significant. There's something about them that was meaningful, you know, and that can be whatever angle you want to take on it. And the idea really for the viewer is, it's really just an excuse for us to nerd out a bit about some cool players and then find out specifically from Rapha's point of view, what did he think was interesting about this guy? What was unique about them? So you ready? You got your 4?
Yeah, I've got my 4. Unfortunately, a couple will be left out, but I think I'm going to go with...
Just give us the first one first, okay?
Yeah. My approach is going to be how much they've impacted myself, whether it's been how much I've gained from watching them and or how much they've had to, like, literally they've pushed me to my limit and made me become a better player because of how good they became. So my first is obviously going to be 04. I think it's an easy pick for me to pick him because he comes from the lineage of Thresh, Machiavelli, then him. And I think, you know, what he did in Quake 3, moving past Fatality and becoming the best for, I would say, about a good 2-year stretch of winning almost everything. I think he was the one that finally and first understood that you don't just play the map, that you play the player. And he did such a good job of imposing his will on the opponent and playing by positioning and reading the player, and it just surprising people in ways that others hadn't, because he's trying to think ahead of them and play the odds and play aggressively in that manner. And that's something that when, you know, I started watching pro demos back in the day, I noticed like how well he positioned himself for rockets and rails and cutting off the opponent in situations where others wouldn't, and how smart it actually was to play certain positions even though items were still up, and to utilize them like at your back rather than, you know, just playing them and constantly collecting them. And so finding unique ways to force people into situations that they're not used to, and which can make people nervous when it comes to LAN play, right? If you're constantly being put in strange situations, you have to adapt so quickly since everything is on the line in that one moment. And I think that's something that 04 for a long time excelled in. And and then I think the other reason I picked him over a couple other NA players from that era is because of his ability when he decided to take me under his wing, his ability to translate the knowledge that he had into it actually being applicable, and being, you know, a good coach in that sense of seeing what I actually needed to have, you know, changed in my game and what needed to be told to me to get me over like the small hump. I mean, literally, it's so many players will get to that point where they have the potential to be the best, but they hit that wall or they hit that plateau and they just never surpass it for whatever the reasons are. But I think he did a fantastic job of finding those things in me and like helping to teach me, but also like challenging me in a sense to be that. Like he wasn't just, just a coach. It was like, you know what, prove yourself, be better than me, like do this or do that. You're not doing well enough in these areas type thing. So it's not just like, like, how would I put this? Like, in the NFL, like you have certain coaches that are like a player's coach,
yes.
but then others are like a coach's coach,
Yes.
Like I think he did a great job of being more of the second kind, of being an actual like coach and not worrying about what I think, like compared to just being blunt with me. And I think that's exactly what I needed. And it's something that I hope at some point down the line, like if I can find somebody that I think has the potential to be the best, that hopefully I can carry on that lineage and do the same and pass it down.
So one thing you referenced there, which I think is a great hallmark of Zero4's game, is that in the early days of Quake, when he became a very good player, there was a tendency that if people had a really high skill level, so the obvious example of this is like people who had amazing rails, is they would tend to just, you see this in all sports, in esports since then, they rely on it like a crutch, basically. And they think like, right, well, since I've got an amazing rail, I should go for as many rail shots as possible. I should like just go for every shot and I can hit any shot. And so they tend to actually be fairly undisciplined players. In part, it's quite logical, actually. It's intuitive because, obviously they can get into situations, and whereas another player would learn, well, that's not a good spot to be in because I died, they hit the 3 rails and they're out of the scenario, and they in their brain, oh, it's fine. What are you talking about? I got the kill, or I survived. Whereas one of the things I noticed about him very early on that set him apart was he clearly had very good aim and he had, some top skills. But as you say, he was partnering it with like an understanding of like, why not make the shot as easy as possible? Why not make it so that I can hit this every time? Or why not make it so that, as you're saying with like rockets, the guy has to walk into the rocket. I'm not trying to hit a really difficult one, I like lure him into it. So this is clearly something that you applied to your game, right?
Oh, absolutely. One of the main things he tried to teach me is, especially with Quake 3 Duel at the time, don't allow yourself to rely on rail. Rail is inconsistent. And because it's such a all-in weapon, right? You're going to either do a bunch or you're going to do absolutely nothing. And when it comes to land play, rockets and LG tend to be the better basis of your game. Rockets for your defensive, play and positioning, whereas an LG is like so much more fluid and easy to hit on land, and it's your consistent damage outsource, right? So the thing with rail is he tried to make his game to where if he's taking railgun shots, if he misses, it doesn't punish him, right? Whereas so many people, like you were explaining, there are other famous players who were very good with railgun. They would put themselves in dangerous situations to keep hitting the shots to gain an advantage. But if you miss that shot, like how much you can be punished sometimes is unbelievable because of like the reload time. So he always tried to focus his game on doing the best he could to set up good situations for himself, and if he was hitting good rails, it's just a bonus to his game, which makes him feel that much more difficult to play against because he's not putting himself out there for easy damage from opponents. And so he's just taking what he can get and slowly create and open the player. And I think something as well that I took from him and got very good at is you could see in his play style, the longer a game went on, the more he understood what the other player was doing. And that's something that I ended up being very good at as well, is reading and adapting to the play style of the other player. I think early on in his career, that's what he was really good at, is not overextending for damage that was unnecessary. And but I'd say later on, he kind of like opened up his game a little bit more than he should have, and he started falling into some of those traps. I'd say like around QuakeLive era, but yeah, that's something that I noticed that set him apart, and really felt that I should apply it to my game.
So likewise, you also referenced the idea, and this is another great way to describe him, is he's one of the first people, at least in Quake 3, like obviously you could make an argument for someone like Thresh in the games before, but in Quake 3, he was the first person who really took that mentality of like, I play the opponent, not the map. Because back then, people just had their strong maps, and for whatever reasons, they were good on that, and they tended to run them in a fairly similar fashion and kind of just play the numbers out and see who won the game, But he obviously, if you look at the way he positions himself, and especially if he has a lead, the way he doesn't have to take fights, but he can keep the lead, and if he can pressure, these are all things people will see in your game and how you played. So I know one thing over the years was, because this guy literally was a mentor of yours, even sometimes when he wasn't at a tournament with you, you could reach out to him, right? And you could say something like, hey, I'm going to play this guy next. Like, what do you think? Or he could give you his perspective. So how in your mind does that apply to your game then? The idea of like play the opponent, not just the map or the situation, like specifically try and think about their tendencies or what they do.
Yeah, I think it's all about just giving yourself the best chance to win, and that's something that he helped me apply with my mindset, and part of that was just my own thinking. I always looked at it like, why allow yourself to have a weak map? Like, do everything that you can so that you can take it from anybody, so it's not just an instant loss for you. That never made any sense to me, and I think that's something where 04 was a very balanced player. Like, he didn't really have a very, very weak map. He might have had maybe like one or two opponents over his career that like really pushed him to the limit and he struggled against every now and then, but for the most part, like, he was super skilled on every map, and so he could potentially take that, and in a series, when you take an opponent's map and that sets them off, their game, and they realize like, okay, well, now I got to play the map that he's the best at. How am I going to like come back and beat him there? It can really get into certain people's heads if they're not mentally strong, and they're not, if they're not like doing everything that it takes to win, like, and have like a weaker mindset. And I think that's something that was very good about him, is having that strong mindset and being balanced in that. And then when it came to my play, like, there were a couple of years where he didn't play in QuakeLive. Definitely when I would go to Europe and boot camp a bit, I would have him in his spare time, if he was willing to, he would join the servers with me, and he would just watch. He would either watch from my point of view, or he would watch from the opponent's point of view, and he wouldn't record. He would just watch seriously, and he would take a few notes for me, like, certain weaknesses, like at this point, like in my playing shape that I'm showing, and what I need to fix. And we would discuss certain things, or like there would be a new map that would come out, and I would try to like shoot ideas back and forth on what like the best overall strategy would be to play against certain play styles and positions to hold, the type of flow for the game to play, and like what we thought was optimal. And he would just give me his honest opinion. And I think it really did help me a lot, especially before the second IEM. I think that's the biggest point, because there was a big patch change beforehand where the game got a bit faster. Like, hitboxes got smaller, and like strafe jumping and things like got a little faster and easier. So you having great movement didn't set you apart as much. So like, he pointed out a lot of things to me when I was playing like Strengths and Sparty and like one or two other players in practice. And like, I really took those notes to heart, and like watched and reviewed the games, and then started to apply them. And once it came to LAN time, I just got stronger and stronger as I like rounded out my game. And that's something I've always been grateful for, that he's been willing to just, like I said, just bluntly tell me, what I need to adjust in my game if he sees anything.
One last topic, I think, on 04 before we move on, that you've kind of touched on here, is another quality that he had, which made him a champion, was when he got to the championship level, he was able to break through and play in the big games. And this is something where, if people don't know his history, at the beginning of Quake 3, he was playing Quake 3 the whole time, but actually, like at the first big tournament, he bombed it. Then later on, he became like a contender. He could come third, come second, but actually there was a couple of people in his way. And then when he broke through, then he was just the champion from then on. He was winning all the big tournaments. He became dominant. So he's clearly not someone who, there's some people are just very rarely, there's some people just have that natural ability, whatever reason, they just have like they don't get frazzled by anything, nothing phases them, but those are very rare, those people. What's amazing I've found is you find a lot of champions, actually, when you see the finished product, you think they're like that. You think, oh, this is a guy who just from day one, had insane confidence. But some of them, they can make themselves into that. So what would you say on this topic of like, because there's two parts to it. One is like, when you've got the skills to do it, doesn't mean you will win the championship. There's like how to play in big games. But I think the other part, something that's always fascinated me, is I've always felt like what keeps a champion on top is that there's a lot of players where if they had their day, yeah, they win the tournament. But if they don't, they go, I was having a bad day. Things went badly. But the champion seems like the guy where he can sort of win when it isn't his day, if you know what I mean. Like when something's going badly, or even obviously the best example is when the opponent's playing amazingly and that somehow you don't sort of give up. So is this something, with these conversations you've had with him, how have you applied this? Because again, it's something where you've kind of followed in his footsteps in that sense.
Yeah, I think the biggest advice that he gave me in that regard was to kind of mentally understand that the 100% level that you've played in practice where you feel like you're on top of your game and you're untouchable, that you're not going to play that way in a tournament setting, because of the farther you get in a tournament, the more stress is applied, the more you have to deal with nerves. It's just everything is on the line. And just to put it rationally, you're likely not going to play at that highest level consistently. Sure. Whereas some people in their mind, they get, like if only I played this well or aimed this well, where it's like, well, no, even though sometimes you feel like that can be your potential, that's not really what your consistent level is. So you need to think like, okay, if I'm playing at 70 to 80% of my normal level, how can I apply this to try to beat the other guy? Like literally doing everything you can to play not to lose. And as the game keeps going on, read your opponent, start making really intelligent plays based off of anticipating what they're going to do and playing specifically to their play style, and not being super predictable, and just applying that and knowing like we touched on earlier, that you're not relying on having to hit everything. Whereas some players, they play that way. They feel like they're that confident in their aim that they can go into a fight and hit everything. Sure. Don't let fights come down to that. Like if you can, you just play your overall game, and then every now and then the opponent is going to be like, you're at the top for a reason. They are going to force some bad fights for you. They're going to make good decisions. And hopefully at some point you do hit like some insane shots and that pulls you back through, and then you just play your consistent by the fundamentals game and you keep forcing them out and applying proper pressure. But just allow those moments to come to you, those, sick air rockets or whatever. Like just don't try to set up and wait for them. I think that's something that's what really set him apart, is because like you said, once he did start winning, he gained confidence in himself. But I think he gained a lot of experience and he understood. And I think that's what he typically, until Cooler came about, is when he played European players, he actually did much better against European players than he did against Americans, because Americans like knew his play style.
Right.
Whereas like when he played Europeans, he was always playing to be ready for anything. So even though Europeans tend to have like consistently better aim and they're a little more flashy, but if you're ready for those situations and you anticipate they might like be a little bit more aggressive or do something, cute, like if you catch them off guard like that, you can really punish them, because then they've allowed too many items to be up when they've died. And so they lose full control and things like that. And I think that's something that he mastered compared to other players for a long time, is just being ready for everything and trying to play the most consistent game that he could with his skill set and playing against his opponents.
Okay, so we've got a pretty good name to start off with there. Who's number 2 on the list going to be? Who's our second Mount Rushmore entry?
I think by just going through the timeline, you'd have to say Cooler, because Cooler is the one that he stepped up what the elite tier of Quake was at the time and changed the game in a sense, and sort of like play styles and how people tried to copy his game and viewed it as the proper way to play. Cooler really set himself apart with strategizing of, he played the map better than any other player as far as timing, like trying to literally just, as I've said before, he was like, the best analogy is he was like a boa constrictor. He like literally tried to suffocate people with just intelligence and controlling the map compared to overall raw fighting skill. And don't get me wrong, it's not as though Cooler can't aim and he can't dodge. He actually has some of the best dodging in the world. Like, it's just, it's really inexplicable. You can't explain it. You have to experience that for yourself as to why his dodging is so much better than others and how he plays angles and fights and the type of escapes he leaves himself and whatnot. And yeah, he's the one that, 04 was on top for so long, and he managed to be the thorn in his side. And from 2003 to like 2005 was probably the best Quake 3 player at the time. And I think a lot of people forget that the very first big Quake 4 tournament, Cooler was the winner.
Yes,
he's the one that won it. Yeah. And you know, for as far as like whether it's lack of motivation and stuff, didn't like the, you know, Quake 4 itself later on or whatever, like he still proved that even in another game he could be the best, and his play style was a very dominant one. And to see how he brought that all back when he was really motivated for QuakeLive, and how good he was in the past, and actually how much he improved and got to the top, even though he fell short a few times of being a world champion again. Like, he literally took his game to another level, and that's something that I always was impressed with. And just always have looked at him with respect, and how hard that he's worked when he's dedicated that time to trying to go after what he wants.
So as you say there, obviously this is a very famous aspect of Cooler, is that he really will just try to like take the whole map and like control everything and know even what armor you're on and what the timing of that is, so he knows where he can go safely and what to get. Right, when you do this, that sounds, again, like, it's one of the great things about Quake is it's so easy to say what you should do, but everyone knows the feeling if you've ever played a 1v1 Quake duel of like the intensity, and you're just stuck in the moment and it's hard to plan. And then if obviously people are literally shooting you, who have the best aim in the world, it's like that old Mike Tyson quote, like everyone has a plan until they get hit. It's like, you know, everyone thinks, oh, you know, of course I'd run all the armors and do this, but actually even some fantastic players, they get in control and they start thinking stuff like, right, where am I going to get my next kill here? And, you know, what am I going to do at this point? And, oh, should I leave that item up to trick him? They start, like, having all these really weird ways of thinking. So it's actually not that obvious that you'd do this style, right?
Yeah, I think one thing it can lead to is it's two things with his style and how forcefully he played maps. It can make you predictable. So the times that he has failed against opponents, it's because of how he's trying to control the map. He's opened himself up for free damage sometimes and like being delayed, and that's how you like break his cycle. But the same thing goes the other way sometimes, like with the way that control is. It makes your opponent very predictable as well if you're the one cycling the map that way, because he literally is like choked out of the map. He doesn't have the resources to contest you, so he can only be in like one of two areas to be effective. So it allows you to kind of mentally keep check of where he is at all times. So it really is a very difficult play style to overcome. Like once Cooler gets going and he is like really locking down the map, it takes like all of your focus and willpower to not give in to really dire situations and to just slowly grind your way back into the game. It is a very grinding play style, if that makes sense, where it's like it could be kind of robotic in the sense of how he runs the map and decisions that he makes, but it's very, very effective. And then randomly here or there, he'll make a read on a player and switch up what he's doing and catch people off guard for free kills, which is like the worst thing to experience when playing against that playstyle, because if you die for free, he just continues the death cycle. Yes. and is never ending. So there's definitely been games in the past where he's taken some of the best players to the limit and hasn't died. Like he's looking at this matchup, oh, this match should be really, really close, etc. And then you see how he's playing him on this one map and he wins like 12-0, and you're like, okay, well, that shouldn't happen, but it does sometimes. Like if he's playing his perfect game, it's really something to see.
So the funny thing about when you're talking about like the aspect though of when he'll throw in the unexpected element. So another thing about Cooler that I always thought was just like, it's astonishing to watch even when you break down the demo is, I mean, this is one of the reasons why I always thought like he was so good at DM6, which obviously was his favorite map. And then later on, very good DM14 player, is if you describe that aspect when he's in control, someone might naively think that, because a lot of people do this, okay? A lot of Quake players, one of their flaws is whatever their strength is, they play as though the opponent has that strength when they're out of control, and they play as though they were playing against themselves, because they do think that naive question of like, what would I do? Which is a good starting premise, but you've also got to think how would he think of it though? Now, the difference is when Cooler's out of control, you would think, based on what you just said there, like he would do the same thing. He would be very conservative. He would just like, which yellow can I get? I've got to really like set up for 3 minutes from now. I can attack for a certain item. But actually, one of the things he was very famous for is he probably has one of the best sort of like triggers on when to very decisively, immediately try and get control back. Like he's probably one of the best players I've ever seen for somehow knowing that when you won that fight, that like, you're only on 30 health, and if he gets to this item at the same time, even if you can get to it, maybe he can kill you. It's like, it's really tough to know how to pull the trigger on that, because obviously if you mistime it, you're in an even worse spot. You lost control, and now you just gave away another freak. It's a very tough, it's hard to gauge that, right?
Oh yeah, totally. And I agree with you. Like, I think he has had some of the best intuition for off-spawn, understanding power shifts. Like, if he's still actually from spawn, whatever weapon he has, the item that's coming up, based off the previous fight, whether he can go all in and he can like contest you for that item. And it's either one of two things. He's going to get the frag back and control immediately, or he's looking to trade. I think he's been one of the best at understanding of trading his life for, let's say like he understands, okay, I died, but if I give up like 2 more fights in the next 20 seconds, I'll get full control back. Not just like part control and, potentially the opponent will get it again for me. No, I will get full lockdown control again if I invest a couple kills, and then he's looking to get the free frag after that and then cycle spawns and bring back. So he's like trying to trade like 2 of his lives for potentially 4 and keep control, in that sense. He's somebody that I think was the best at that for a long time, and I think I was the one personally who probably pushed him to be better at playing slow with control, like playing the long game of items, where like he understood like after a couple tournaments that he needed to fix that. And so he tried to add that to his out of control game as well. And then I'd say like from 2010 to 2011, like playing him became the most difficult. That's probably the best that he was in that era, because of his understanding of slow play and fast play to get control back. And it was very, very tough to play against.
And also, you touched there when you gave sort of that brief career overview of his, on the idea that he came back in these other games. He came back in Quake 4, and sure, he was only really like fully into that early on because people, he even admitted himself sometimes that he wasn't practicing much. He just played for the money, and to him it was like, if I don't practice but I can come forth and get this money, it's better than whatever job I would get in real life. So okay, I can sort of give him a bit of leeway on that one. But when he came back in QuakeLive, he even fully said, yeah, I'm fully all back in. I'm here to win the IEM and to win the tournaments and stuff. And I always thought that's actually very unique if you think about it in Quake history, because okay, sure, technically 04 and CZM played QuakeLive as well, but first of all, they never went fully all in on it. They all had a side thing, or they had something else in their life, and they would even tell you, no, I'm playing this because I can, or I've got some time off here. And also, none of us had the expectation. Like, if CZM lost in an IEM group stage, I didn't go, right, well, turns out he wasn't that great 10 years ago. It's like, no, it's obviously, he's not fully going all in, it's not the proper CZM. He's just giving us what he can now. But by actually coming back and going 100% and trying to beat you and Cypher and Havoc, these players who it's their time to shine, that's actually pretty ballsy to put yourself on the line in a way. Because here's the thing, I've always said this. Sure, in a Quake 3 context, you could maybe make some argument still that Cooler's like the best player. But you can't do that thing where, like, I could actually do it now. I could say, you know what, Cypher was amazing in QuakeLive, but what would have happened if 04 had been playing and he'd really gone full, or Fatality or CZ? You could always do that shadow boxing. Well, Cooler, I mean, in a sense, it's sad because he obviously didn't win the tournaments, but he actually gave us that opportunity. We got to see that. He really did go head to head with you guys and give it 100%. That's pretty unique.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, I mean, I obviously don't feel too sorry. I managed to win IEM back to back, but
listen, some people took them from you as well, mate. You have a few trophies you wanted.
But I look in looking at it from the outside, like the retrospect of him making both IEMs, finishing second, the QuakeCon final against Cypher, which I cannot believe the demos are like. Yeah, I know. Like, we'll never get to see the demos of those they were lost for whatever reason. But that final and watching that and the level that he played, and if you look at those finals that he lost, and then the European final that he won against Avec, I'd say the one thing that held him back is the problem that Fox had. Whereas Fox was one of literally probably the best players in the world when it came to group stage and like early parts of the tournament. But the farther the tournament went on, it's like either he got more nervous or he doubted himself. You know, like if you play the odds sometimes, like you know that you should be winning a fight or two, but if you lose that, some people have a tendency to stop trusting in proper fights. And so then they stop playing the way that they should. And I think in some of those finals, Cooler kind of fell victim to that in not fully playing his own game. Like you need to play against your opponent, but you need to be confident in the fights that you can take that should be successful for yourself. And if you look at how he played against Avec in that final, and Avec was somebody he struggled against.
Yes.
It was like one of these ring of players, like transitive property, where he could play another player who could beat Avec, but Avec would beat Cooler for a long time. And that final, Cooler finally got over that and literally just played his game. Like he was playing very well, and so was Avec. It's not like Avec was having an off day or something. Like, but Cooler was playing very, very well. He was believing in the choices that he made, and he wasn't letting things slip through his fingers. You know, like he was going for the fights that he should. And I think in both the finals against me, there's probably a huge opportunity or two that he missed out on because he doubted himself. And I think against Cypher as well in multiple finals, whether it be the QuakeCon one or online stuff or European qualifiers, because of, you know, Cypher was another one where he really struggled against, and he probably only beat like once, maybe twice in his career when it came to QuakeLive, whereas Cypher would beat him every other time. He would get to the point where he doubts himself, you know, and but to see how far he elevated his game to take himself to that point, to give himself that shot, like a legitimate shot, and it's like literally a moment or two away from some games of turning it all around. It was like pretty impressive to see, and I personally enjoyed it. It helped me push my game to some of the highest level. Obviously, you know, some of the highest levels that I've played. It's like because of playing these players. And yeah, the matches that I played against Anton have always been super special because of how our play styles clash and how we try to outthink each other. And yeah, it's something that's always going to be very memorable and enjoyable for me in terms of thinking back on my career's games against Anton and how much they meant.
When you referenced a bunch of those really obviously high-profile finals that he played in and a bunch of them very narrowly lost, it actually reminds me of a point you made in our Reflections interview, which was a very good point, actually. I hadn't thought of it this way, where I said that, like, it was super depressing to me when I read that interview where Cooler said like the best moment in his career was winning like DreamHack Winter in Overwatch. Because obviously if you're like a Quake enthusiast, you're like, what? Oh, come on, man. It's got to be, you know, ESWC or something. But your point was a very good one, which is that if you actually think, because in QuakeLive, he only won that European Championship. And even though there were very good players, obviously people would just go, yeah, but you have to win the World Championship in Quake, you know, that you didn't play rapha, etc. He didn't, sadly, a lot of those amazing finals he was in, which were some of the best games ever, he was always on the losing end of them. So it is very hard as a competitor, right? Like you want to be able to do that, to be like I notice people have to do this in all 1v1 games, like in tennis or whatever. If they play some amazing final, they try and put on the professional face and be like, you know, it was a privilege just to be a part of the match. But if you're the one who loses it, it's a bit hard not to be a bit bitter about it. And as you say, like, you know, there's going to be those two moments you think where it's like, right, I could have done that, or I thought about that, but I didn't do it, you know?
Oh, are you talking about from my perspective, or? From
yours, like, as well, tied to that? Because, I mean, it's happened to you as well, your career, right?
Yeah, I think it's more of, there's been times where I've definitely, when I've lost a final, I've had that mentality, but it's more so of, I've always, there was my high school basketball coaches, his mentality of, you want to make sure that if you lose, it's because you were beaten, that you didn't lose. So you gave everything on the line and that they did amazing and they outplayed you rather than you giving away the game, you know? And there's been a final or two where I have just played horrific, like making really dumb decisions or like just not feeling right on that day and not playing well enough and just kind of giving away the final, compared to, I'd say the one where I felt, and like we talked about this in the interview a while ago, the final where I felt most content with the loss was the DreamHack Winter 2013 final against Cypher. Yes. I felt both of us were playing at some of the highest we've ever played, and there had been some finals where like I would win against him and you could tell like he wasn't playing his best, which is partly like me forcing that onto him and then vice versa. But finally to have a final where we both played all out and it was so close and we played so well, like I just felt, hey, I played at my very best and he played, fucking amazing to win that final. Like I didn't have any bad feelings about losing that at all. Whereas compared to, let's say, like times where Cooler has, definitely lost finals on some really strange decision or some random spawn, which has happened from time to time. Like myself with that, I don't know. I always try to view like if you want to think like that, you have to get rid of it after like a week or two. You can't let that stew in your mindset like going into the next event, because then it leads to doubting yourself in situations that you should play in. You start getting scared that certain random things will happen again. Well, first of all, if they're random, you can't control them anyway. So just have the mindset that you can of doing everything to control what you can and playing at your best. And you just got to go with it like that. And for some players, I think it's a little easier to do that than others. I think Cypher is another one who's really done very well with that. Like he's struggled for bits at a time, like for a couple months at a time with tournaments, but then eventually like gets rid of that mindset of all that doubt and like starts adjusting his game and believing again. You just see that confidence that overflows in his play style and how impressively he's won some tournaments before.
I think that ties into what you said earlier when you were talking about like the idea of like sometimes maybe he got rattled in a final and didn't play his game, because as you say, that's the thing that's going to haunt you later, is like, I should really have just done this. Whereas like to use your analogy of basketball, the great coaches in basketball always say in certain scenarios, like if you play amazing defense on a guy and he hits some ridiculous like 3-pointer in your face in the corner, it's like you just have to take your hat off and go, well done, you win.
Exactly.
But you did your job, you don't go like, I'm going to do something totally different I'd never do before, because then as you're saying, you end and you think, I didn't really get my chance to do what I was supposed to do. So, okay, one last thing about Kula I had a question about was, since he's someone I know you've said in interviews that in the early days when you were stuck at home and you didn't always have great internet, so you couldn't just play duels like everyone else might to learn the game, you could watch demos and you could try and figure out what are these players doing, etc. Well, okay, sure. By the time you get to QuakeLive, one of the things Cooler also had to develop in his game was he had to tool up his game so he had good aim and he could rail, etc. Things that he wasn't as famous for in Quake 3. But in Quake 3, one of the things that set him apart as a champion was, I think he was one of the first champions we ever had who probably wasn't even close to the best in terms of raw skill. Like, I mean, sure, he had a good lightning gun, I remember, but like, no, his rockets in rail weren't like the best, or he didn't have any like exceptional talent. So when he then did become the champion, it was clear to everyone, right, there's something mentally going on with this guy. He's got something about understanding of the game strategy, right? Clearly that's a parallel that your game has shared. I mean, as we discussed in the interview, maybe people have gone too far implying that, like, you're not an old granddad. Like, you can actually shoot a rocket and a rail if needed. But obviously it was never the part of your game you relied upon in line with some of the stuff from the 0-4 aspect. So did you take anything from Cooler in that respect as well about trying to beat people, and sometimes people who maybe outskill you, but figuring out how to do that, basically, because that's a game in itself, right?
Yeah, I think what he was best at back in the Quake 3 era was, as far as like mechanics go, was his dodging, how he was moving and manipulating angles and fights. And his rockets were actually very good, but he didn't put himself in positions to have to hit amazing rockets all the time, right? So if he hit them, they're just a big bonus. But I think what was really strange to watch in his playstyle back then is his tracking was actually very good. Like his machine gun and his LG aim was so good, but his rail was like really inconsistent. Oh yeah, there were some games he would rail like 15%, and it's like, okay, man, like, come on, hit some shots, right? But like with his tracking, he was so comfortable with it, with the way that he's dodging and things like that. Like that really could surprise some people. I think they won't expect him to hit that well with how he's dodging and eliminating damage from them, but still hitting so hard. And I think what I tried to take from both his game and 04's game was both of them were very good at limiting opponents' options, but they did it differently. Cooler tried to eliminate options based off of full map control and like resource management, whereas 04 tried to do it based off of more positioning and decision making, like making certain decisions based off of reads of players, where they're going to be, why they're going to take these shots, etc., what positions to hold. Do you really have to be on the item at that time, or can you hold farther out to cut people off beforehand where they're not expecting you to be, and things like that, and then fall back to items. So I tried to look at their styles, and like I felt like I could probably combine the two. Like they both really stuck to their strengths in that aspect, but I felt like, you know, somebody out there should really combine these, and why can't it be me? So I really tried my best to mix both their playstyles. Yeah, mix both their playstyles together, and then add my own flair, like here and there. And because I for quite a few years I had the same issue, whereas like I didn't have the best aim out of the top 10 or 15 players, right? I had very good, consistent aim, but I didn't have the best aim where I could win out of position fights a lot. Whereas like players like Cypher or Avec or Strengths or Fox could do that. I had to play much more consistent and percentage based, and finding unique opportunities to deal damage without taking any, to gain advantages that way, and to overpower my opponents. But as the years have gone on, I think my aim has actually gotten better, and so that I don't really think that applies so much anymore. But yeah, I definitely for quite a few years held that same sentiment with Cooler in the sense of not having the most elite aim and trying to really outthink and outsmart opponents in order to win.
Well, it was definitely a hell of a peanut butter and jelly sandwich you put together with those two styles there. Okay, yep. Who's number 3 going to be on our list?
Okay, for me it's Cypher. I think watching him in Quake 4 right before Quake 3 came back, the skill in that what summer was that? 2007. Yes. Like watching him as a player improve the way he did, and taking Toxic to the limit multiple times and beating other players, and then how he transitioned his game back into Quake 3 and the dominant force that he became was just, it's like the same thing. Like I said, the game evolved because of one player, because of how dominantly they played the game in their style. Whereas he took the concept, I think, of he played a little bit like Cooler, but he played more like 04, and just pushed that to the limit of playing positioning and playing the player. And he was the best at optimizing dealing damage while minimizing taking damage. There's so many times I've watched games and I'm like, how the hell did he just win when he had 100 health, 50 armor, and the other guy is like 150, 150? Like, there's so many things that could have went wrong, but just the way that he positioned and thought about fights and angles, like it just dealing all sorts of free damage and knowing how to bait and be unpredictable compared to other players was something phenomenal that I think will be really hard to find in another player again. And like to play against that type of play style from how I played, I tried to play such a balanced game, and then to play somebody who can just do things that no other player can, and like the clash that has brought year after year, and like how many times we've had to push ourselves to become better players to best the other. Yeah, he's definitely up there in my top 4 for sure. And he's beat everybody. It's not like he's gotten to the finals and he's only been able to beat a certain player or whatever. No, he's like gotten to multiple finals, and whoever is there, he's been able to come out on top time and time again. And he's got, probably out of the players that I'm going to list, he has the most enjoyable playstyle to watch. Like just his mouse control and his movement and how he plays is just so fluid compared to how other people appear and look.
Yes.
It's just so smooth, and it's just nice to watch. It's like really appealing.
Okay, so one aspect you alluded to there about the ridiculous ability to do damage and not take as much. So one of the things where I noticed that was different as a result of this aspect is that, okay, so when I gave the example of when Kula would sometimes, like, he's the one who's not in control, but he'll come for a fight. That is because in his mind, he's tried to calculate, like, right, I think this is like an opening, and if I just sort of like brute force my way into the door, I could get in, or I'm going to make it so chaotic in the next 2 fights that, like, you know, even if the guy's still in control, who the fuck knows what's going to happen at that point? You know, I'll take the gamble. It's like, what must be so tough about playing Cypher is, like, his idea of what a stack is so much lower than other players. Like, the amount of times I've seen him go for a red armor fight where it's like he has like 89 health and like 40 armor. It's like, why is he going for this fight? And it's like, he knows that he can play around this spot here, or he can get this rocket on the guy first, right? That, even though obviously in the early days of QuakeLive, you were beating him quite a lot and your style was working against him. In a way, that does sort of feel like a tailor-made skill set to do well against rapha, because you're trying to set up traps for someone. You're trying to bring them into a fight when they've got a worse stack than you. This is in theory what you want. It reminds me of, like, to give you another basketball example, I remember towards the end of when the Lakers were doing really well, and it was the 2010 run, and they had that Western Conference Finals where it was against the Suns. And if you remember some of the last games of this series, right, it was where Grant Hill was playing amazing defense on Kobe Bryant. He was like literally, you know, like hanging off his face, like hand right in front of his face on every shot, like never let him get inside to like the mid range. It was all like around the 3-pointer, but Kobe Bryant hit loads of these shots. And at the end of it, right, there was a great line by Charles Barkley where he just said, if I'm the coach, I'm actually saying to Grant Hill, like, great job. Let's try and make him hit those shots. But it's like, but he hit them all. So what do you even do against a style like that? Like, how do you play that style?
Exactly. I don't know. I think Cypher just had such a good sense of, he understood power in positioning and like small little angles and adjusting instantly, like in those fights. Like fights that he ended up getting amazing at was the red armor area on Furious Heights, like using and utilizing the pillars and understanding how long he could be in certain fights to gain the advantage even though he was out of stack, and then collect the heavy and then win fights, or certain positionings that he had, or like looking at his games on Aerowalk as well, like understanding how much damage he can output in certain times from certain angles, even though like you're doing the right thing, like you're trying to make the right plays, but he's somehow utilizing that against you sometimes just because of what he can do. In the same sense of what you're saying with, you know, the Kobe Bryant reference, like you're literally playing as best as you can, and sometimes that's not going to be good enough. Like he's just going to make certain things happen, and you just have to, it's a very tough thing as a player to mentally just stay calm about and not let you get rattled. You know, it can feel like very overwhelming at times, and if you don't keep yourself in check and keep focused on like the proper things in the game that you need to be worrying about, and keeping yourself thinking about the next 30 seconds, what can you do, how can you turn this around, you know, do you need to respect certain things, etc., and not tilting, like it's so important to be able to do that. And he is potentially one of the most tilting players to play against just because of the things that he can pull off that are just so amazing.
Okay, and in line with that, since obviously, yes, his skill level and his like raw ability with some of the weapons is very famous, and it's something that, as you say, like if you're watching him, if you just were to tell someone like the most box office player to watch, it's obviously Cypher, because it's so smooth, everything looks so flawless, you know. Now there's a lot of players in Quake. Obviously, one of the things Quake as a game is famous for is precision aim, like twitch fiber muscle. So there's a lot of amazing players with a railgun or a rocket or whatever. Was there something different about how he actually used those weapons though? Like he clearly wasn't, we've just explained, it wasn't just the aim alone that's getting it done, but did he actually use them in a unique way? Because for example, okay, I always thought that like a flaw that Strengths had was his aim was amazing, but like in a way it could make him predictable, if you know what I mean. Like you know what shot he's going to go for, and you know that if he hits this shot he's going to go. So he maybe didn't always pick up on it himself, but actually that could also be his flaw, you know.
I think how Cypher utilized the angles for shots, he did such a good job of like kind of baiting you into a tough decision within the fight, like that you can only do option A or option B. And so it's very easy for him to adjust and adapt in those fights, whereas then he creates positions where he has multiple options of where to dodge and what weapons to use and things like that. I think that's some of the best. And you know, like you watch certain players and how they use like lightning gun. Something that he was so good at is like like think about Blood Run, and you're holding the grenade launcher, and somebody is coming, from Mega, or they're down at Rail or something like that. They're on the lower level. That is a very tough angle, like looking down, like vertically trying to shoot with LG. Yeah. But he was the best at like predicting where you would want to go, and he would just do like just a quick stream of brrr, and all of a sudden you've taken 70 damage. Whereas like somebody else would like peek at that angle or whatever, they're not like ready and predicting that exact angle, and they only do like 14 to 20 damage. So he would like take these small little things that would just add up and be so much that all of a sudden you're like, well, damn it, like I never take this type of damage against another player. Like everything that should have been happening and me forcing like certain fights and positioning, now I've actually taken too much damage, and if I push now with his positioning, it's too risky. He was the best at doing that free chip damage and just understanding how to make himself difficult to hit while easily hitting you and opening up those angles. And another thing was knowing when to double back or triple back and hit rails, where like people won't expect you to like rush back through a certain doorway or an angle, and he would get free shots and like constantly hit and apply pressure like that. And he was just so good at being fluid with that it's very, very difficult to deal with.
Did it? I mean, this is one of those like softball obvious questions, but I ask it anyway because the answer will be interesting. So since you came up in Quake 3, when they had that brief, like it was like a summer to a year or so that we got some Quake 3 again, before QuakeLive came out and between Quake 4, because obviously WSVG died and kind of shut on the scene a little bit. So we had Quake 3 for a year again, and this is when Cypher was just absolutely ridiculous, came into his own. Then we came into QuakeLive. Like I say, the first few times you beat him in a couple of notable outings. Even later on in his career, you were able to beat him. It must have held a special significance for you that the guy who was like the dominant player when you were coming up is the guy that then you managed to find a bunch of success against, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. I mean, I actually had a friendly relationship with Cypher too, and I just looked at it like of just constantly in awe of his play and trying to push myself to be better than that. And eventually, like, he looked at me the same way and trying to push himself to be better, because something that he did for probably like 2 to 3 years when he was at some of his best, not his very best in QuakeLive, but like from that Quake 3 era into the beginning of QuakeLive, is he only timed the mega health to the second, right? Where he like timed that to the second and then just tried to remember the cycle of the armors and played the player in position and cut off like that. Whereas like I ended up beating him in a way and so much that it forced him to be like, even though he was so successful against everybody else, he couldn't play that way anymore. That he had to really focus on his game and change it to try to beat me. And, and in retrospect, I ended up having to do the same. Like there was like a 1 to 2 year period where I didn't beat him back in QuakeLive again. Like I think it was like probably like the end of 2011 through like 2012, 2013. Yes. I like only beat him one time. And it really pushed me to have to like watch his gameplay over again and again and try to figure out how I would play against it, and certain fights that I legit cannot take anymore because he will come out on top, or certain fights that I notice other players are letting slip by when they play him out of like fear or respect, and trying to push and take advantage of those situations. And because I don't know, I've always had a friendly rivalry with him, and it's just I don't know, especially like the QuakeCon like odd thing that was happening where I was winning the odd years, he was winning the even years, just the race and the chase to be better than the other. And I don't know, that's something
it's just a shame you were never bloody playing in the final. That was the most ridiculous part, wasn't it?
Yeah. We played in all these other tournaments for finals, but never QuakeCon final. Yeah,
it's like that ridiculous stat where like when they were active players, like Kobe and LeBron, like were each in the finals something like 7 years in a row, but they never played each other. And obviously, you're like, bloody, why couldn't it happen once? Okay, what about this then?
Yeah.
So when QuakeLive began, and you did get some of these wins against him, and obviously you were the number one player at the time for the first couple of years, right? when you said, so there's two aspects to this. I wanted to ask about like the psychological aspect when you play Cypher. Because on the one hand, as you're saying, when he's in his flow and he's hitting everything, I always thought that the thing that especially tilted Cooler, and to be fair, Cooler was a pretty hard player to tilt, most other players, he's the one who can handle it and he's got a way to come back. But I always thought what tilted him would be those moments where it wasn't just losing. It's that Cooler would like battle through the shots he's hitting, battle back, get in the control finally, and then like, either Cooler would like miss a key rail himself, or Cypher would do some ridiculous thing like he did in the QuakeCon final where he just like hits every single plasma bolt or something, and you're like, in that moment, you just feel like, that just feels unfair. It's like, that's bullshit. That's a bad luck, And so even Cooler would get triggered by these moments like, well, fuck, I just did everything right to get back in control. Like, how do you manage through that, first of all? And then the other side is, obviously, I think a component of the early days of your rivalry in QuakeLive was you kind of had the psychological edge on him. It felt like you could somehow fuck with him a little bit that in a way that other players couldn't, So what would you say to both angles of that?
I'd say my mindset against Cypher compared to Cooler is I didn't look at those situations as luck with Cypher because they happened way too often. So for me, as hard as I was working, I kind of expected a situation or two like that to eventually happen throughout the game.
Right.
And just deal with it. Like, that's going to happen. And what I think I was really successful with in the beginning is I kind of just had a very good feel and intuition for certain decisions Cypher would make. I just understood his mindset and what he was exactly thinking. And so there's certain fights where other players would go to an area and he would definitely catch them off guard and punish them. But I would just get this gut feeling like, don't go there. You cannot go there right now. That is likely where he is going to be. Like 90% of the other players won't be there, but he will be there. And so I would avoid the area. And sometimes like he like sits in that area to wait. And since I have avoided it and he fully expected me to be there, now he doesn't know exactly what to do. Right. Like I went and got an advantage somewhere else by picking up shards or a yellow armor, and then I'm circling back and coming back in a better position with a better stack, that type of thing. And I think that's what I had for a long time against Cypher, was that edge of knowing and understanding the feel of I just feel like I can't be in this area. If I'm in this area, I'm going to die because he's going to do what Cypher does. And for a long time, what really helped with that, I think, is no matter what decision I had to make, I had better timing than he did. So I knew extra escape options that I could go to give myself a chance to get back into the game despite really good decisions that he was making. And eventually he got better and forced himself to time more. And he actually really struggled with it for about a month or two because he used to think so much about reading the player and where they should be in certain fights and angles that when he started thinking about and actually trying to time properly, he would like lose mental capacity on thinking and the type of play style that made him unique, right? But once he like forced himself to grind through that problem, and then timing became more natural for him. And so then he could still implement his playstyle while being even more dominant because now he's actually timing to the second and he's not getting caught out in certain fights and waiting for items that aren't up or like being there too early and things like that. So, that's like the edge that I think I had against him, is because I had the mental fortitude to understand that the things that he pulls off aren't luck. He does it too consistently. And so you can't let that get to you, and I just had a really good intuition on avoiding certain fights that probably would have cost me games against him and catching him out instead. Let's say like planning ahead 15 to 30 seconds down the line around that scenario.
Once I'd started to watch not just Quake but other games as well, and beyond the level of like just the aesthetic, like enjoying great shots and what people are doing, and starting to understand not just like their own strategy but how they see the game and what their like meta game between players is, and probably in my opinion the most interesting aspect, which is like stylistic clash. What strengths do you have, what do they have, where's it going to overlap, where's it going to be drastic differences. One aspect I learned very quickly, which is might be lost on the most casual viewer, viewer is that you have to kind of know the chronology of people's rivalries to really understand where they're at. Because obviously, if you see, for example, at the end of QuakeLive, where Cypher's super amazing and you see how good he is, you could naively look back and see if, for example, a very close game 5 years earlier and go, oh, if it was a close game, maybe he could have won that. Maybe he's just unlucky on that one and then later he got... But it's actually, as you alluded to earlier, it's like the great thing about these games where people are meeting so many times, and especially when you've got a pool of people where you know, like, right, these few other people, I'm going to meet them in semi-finals next time in a final. You know, it's not just like a million people and I can play anyone next. Is people are thinking about the guy who's their rival and who's their opponent, and they are thinking about that last matchup and what they're going to change. And crucially, it's a great line that people have from all 1v1 sports. It's like the losses are the ones that give you like the hard lesson that actually might make you that better champion later. And so you look at, for example, as you said, obviously with Cypher, his style that he took from Quake 3, which was wrecking the whole scene, where he was very loose timing, but because he was just putting all his emphasis on wrecking everyone in the fights, basically, and keeping the pressure on him, like, we probably would have never got the Cypher that had the timing down later if he hadn't had these key losses that kind of made him think, well, if I want to be the champion, I've got to change this. And likewise, obviously, your game had a similar effect on other people. I remember Avec said in an interview, he thought you were the first... I mean, I don't know if this is accurate. Someone probably did it a little bit. But he famously said you were the first player he ever played that he realised was actually trying to, like, figure out the opponent's health at all times. Like, that was just a throwaway thought for some players, you know, but because you were trying to get an extra edge, you were trying to figure out, like, did he pick up the shards there? Like, how many yellows did... You know, these are factors that... I mean, if you're an aim god, maybe you don't have to worry about it always, but... us lesser malls, it's important to know these things. So that's like a cool aspect of all the rivalries, right? It's like every point in time, they all connect to all the different points in time in a way.
Yeah, just constantly adapting. That literally, like, that era was so fun for me to play in. Like we had like the top four of us, and then you had like I'd say like 4 or 6 players on the outside of the Elite Four who could win a tournament if they like played their A game the entire day, and just like having to play them at tournament to tournament and adapting your play style over and over. That's something that was so enjoyable for me, like to have to constantly think about that and how I need to approach the game this time compared to last, because he might be adjusting his play style to mine. And that's something I always tried to do, is not play the exact same, because I didn't want to be predictable and like fall into traps and things like that. And I think that's something that really helped me over the years. And it's something that made it so fun for me to play, even when losing, like to play Cypher again and again, is to be like, damn it, he's gotten so much better. Like, how am I going to approach this in the next tournament? Because like the goal is to be number 1, not to finish 3rd, 4th, or whatever. It's like, it is to win. And so like just thinking about how you need to play style wise and all this other stuff, and adjust your game and how much better you need to get to play against them, it was something, I always look fondly on. It was really enjoyable to do that. I don't know if I may have forgot like part of your question.
No, that was fine. That was good.
So
I'll cut that a little bit. We need that, right? Who's the 4th then? Who was our final rounding out the 4?
And then for me, it has to be Evil, because of the theme of pushing the game to the next level. And just to sum it up kind of quickly, I think with Evil is like, he was a player that played for a long time actually. And he was really, really good in Quake 3 for a brief period in Russia. Like, he was beating Cooler consistently when Cooler was on top, beating everybody else in the world. And he had like one opportunity at some ESWC. He didn't do that great. And then you didn't see him for years. Then he came back in QuakeLive, and slowly from like 2010 up until like 2012, he started to get better and better. And he was a dark horse who just kept working on his game. And instead of trying to play like other players, he just forcefully played. It kind of reminded me like Avec, but took it to the next level of just playing so aggressive and somehow making it work for yourself, and just forcing all these really tough situations down the other guy's throat, and just constant pressure, constant feel of, you never have a second to think for yourself, and the type of fights and aim that he could pull off, and the forceful style that he played. Nobody else played like that. Like, he somehow managed to play such a dominating game. And the thing is, like, he had very good aim, but his aim wasn't like Toxic's, whereas Toxic had amazing aim. But the way that he controlled the map and angles and pushing aggressively was second to none. Like, the literal best thing about Evil was he could enter rooms for certain fights, and even though like against another player you deal like a good rocket or you hit some good plasma spam and a rail or something, and sometimes like you take the damage and it knocks you back and it knocks your aim off, like where your crosshair is or whatever. He was the best at taking damage, and that didn't matter. Like, he could still output so much damage against you regardless of what was happening to him, and could still keep pressing you, that it was like so ridiculous to play against. And to kind of see where how good that he got, and how he had to, again, like with how Cypher and I were pushing each other in our skill level, and how from 2013 to 2016 how much Evil had to force me to change my play style and to specifically play against him and to elevate my own game, because the dude was beating everybody. He was even beating Cypher over in Europe consistently. Like, he was.
I used to watch those cups where, like, every week it would just be him and Cypher in the final, and he'd usually have beaten Cooler early in the tournament.
Yeah, like, he just was this machine that was not losing and just imposing his will no matter what. And like, how hard I had to push myself to get to that level to beat him, and to the point where he legit wasn't losing to any other player, and he was the second best for probably a 3-year period. Like, that's why I have to choose him. Like, you have to look at how dominant he was in those European Cups time and time again, and the players he had to beat to face me in the QuakeCon finals and whatever it was. Yeah, it was just something crazy to see. I don't think anybody expected him to get to that level. Like, maybe he could get to the championship winning level, but like once or twice, but to be able to consistently beat the best players in Europe over and over again, and like how dominantly he did it for quite a while, I think it was really impressive to see and to play against. First of all, it was very annoying to play against. He probably has the most annoying play style I've ever had to deal with.
Sure.
And it was so hard. Like, even though, like, what final was it? The 2015 final, yes. I think, where like I won 3-0. Dude, even though that was 3-0, that was just like super close, and like how stressful and difficult those games were. It wasn't easy by any means. Like, those games could have turned on a dime and been completely different. Like I said, he forced me to push myself to a whole new level, and the level that he stepped up his game to was amazing.
As you say, obviously the very bizarre thing about Evil is that you did a very good job laying out the timeline there, where it's not even that he just came along late. He'd been there the whole time, sort of bobbling under the surface. And then, sadly, obviously he didn't get his really big runs during the time when QuakeLive had its biggest exposure. So a lot of people watching this now, who maybe stopped watching then, won't actually realise that, like, if we'd have extended the metaphor, there would have been a big five, or historically he's definitely in that group, because by the end, as you say, he was unbelievable. But one of the interesting things is the style of play, because as you say, you would think someone who got all his success at the end would have, like, I mean, this is what people always think as an overview to games. It's like, the early part of the game is everyone figuring out the game, and then the rest of the games that, people just refining what everyone understands about the metagame. So the idea someone could come along with, like, a totally new, super intense, like, probably the most hard, it's like the most metal playing style of all time. It's like that boxer mentality of, like, you can get hit, but that shouldn't stop you landing your shot. It's like the guy who's willing to trade shots as long as he gets his shot in, because he thinks he's like Dan Henderson. He's got the fucking H-bomb that if he lands it, you're knocked out, so it's worth him taking the shots. So the ridiculous part about this is, if you were going to coach a player and you found a young guy doing this style, you'd go, no, come on, listen, that's not going to work. Like, top players are going to shut that down. By the way, you'll never beat them in those fights. They're going to know you come in. But obviously, what's great is no one ever did sit this guy down and do that. So he just sort of went so far in to that ridiculous playing style, which, as I say, would be probably the worst you could start out with as a young pro. But he came out the other side somehow and made it work. How does that even work, though? I still don't know myself. I know.
I think he like played Cypher's style, but took it to a level of where you see Cypher was the best at dealing damage and mitigating it and escaping and being very elusive, whereas Evil went the opposite direction of, okay, how do I constantly apply pressure and keep moving forward? Like, how do I keep pushing past certain fights and gaining advantages with angles and aim to gain the better position and to constantly apply pressure and make my opponent weak, even if he kills me, so that he can't like extend his control or whatnot, so that he always feels vulnerable. That's what Evil probably did the best. And like his timing was pretty good, but that is the one thing that kind of failed him in some finals against me, is messing up with timing and being at the wrong place. Or like, and if you go back and watch some of the demos against other players as well, the certain positions he'll hold and where he'll stay and like trick opponents into thinking that he'll go cut off at another item and then he'll catch them. Like he played like a center fielder and just constantly tried to position and rotate and just never let them out of his sights, like always applying pressure, whether it be like you don't feel you can turn that corner because he's looking there, or he is literally fighting you all the time. It was nobody's been able to apply that same kind of play style. Like even with what Claus is playing now in Quake Champions, like he plays very aggressive. It's not the same as what Evil was doing in QuakeLive. Like Evil was, doing something that no other player had been able to do before consistently in applying that kind of pressure and aggressive play and making it work for him. Because I think because in Quake 3, I feel like that style was more applicable because of the way the spawn system worked. Because like you could trade deaths more, and you knew that where you died, you were going to spawn. It wasn't based off your killer's location. Whereas like QuakeLive kind of slowed that down. You didn't get as much spawn fragging. And he somehow managed to find a way to speed up the game due to his like domineering presence with aim and aggressive pushing. He just somehow was able to do that where other players couldn't. And part of that comes down to his work ethic and his skill set. Like he brought something else, another player to the table that nobody else could do as effectively. And that's what made him as strong as he was.
Because one of the interesting things about this is, when you alluded earlier to the fact that, originally Avec was also one of the players that was holding it over Cooler every time they played. And one of the problems was he had some of the strengths. In fact, he'd obviously one of those people who had patterned some of his game off Cooler. And it took Cooler a few years to figure out how to actually play against that and how to make it work. And funnily enough, when Evil came along, I remember thinking, like, right, this will be interesting, because I watched a lot of those cops and kept thinking, like, right, when's Cooler going to figure out how to beat him? And I have to say, he didn't beat him very often. He lost a lot of those. And it wasn't for lack of trying. Like, you can see in the games, you can sort of see the way Cooler's trying to figure it out, But that style, is particularly against Cooler, seems super effective, because actually, when Cooler would die, and then he would try and think like, right, do I get like a moment's breath now to like think of what I'm going to do? Be on him again, just be at him again. And then, for example, you do some damage to the guy and your brain tells you from playing a million other people, right, they've got to pull back now and this item's mine. And it's like, nope, I'm just coming all the way in. And it's like the key, I guess probably one of the Evil strengths is he just doesn't care if he dies, which is pretty rare. One of the things about being a dueler is you're always risk averse in terms of dying, right?
Yeah, at least that's how I played. I definitely played more risk adverse, but I think what he would do is he would be so good at understanding when people are like that, where they're like, okay, nobody else will push here. So it's like, if that player is ready for you to push, you're going to get punished. But he had a great feeling and understanding of, okay, I can continue to push. I'll hold this angle with my LG or whatever, or rocket aim, and then he would get past that point of danger, like, right? So like, because the player's not ready for it, he would get past that point, and then when he's like in your face or like past that position, now he has the advantage because you weren't ready for the obvious thing. He just had such a great feel of knowing when to do that, like when people are just going to let their guard down in that sense and taking advantages that way and just completely punishing them. And the way that he LG'd people, like the angles he held and that he could push forward and aim aggressively with it and his damage output, like it was really hard to deal with. And his aim got better and better. Like the weakest thing of his aim was rail battles, I think. But his like LG aim, rocket aim, especially his plasma aim was really good too. Like it was on par with like Avek's plasma, which was probably some of the best, I think, out of all the pros. And the more years that we played against each other, the better his rail got as well. But just his Yeah, it's just knowing when people would let their guard down and constantly pushing and putting pressure, and knowing when to do that would like really set him apart. And then like, as aggressive as he played, it was difficult to push him. Like he was really good at like backing off and like picking the right angles with rockets for predicting where you would enter a room, whether you would decide to enter at a wide angle or you just like come straight through the corner and just punish you with rockets, or like his LG tracking was so good. Like it was, even when you had the advantages, sometimes you would lose out on it because he would catch you out like Cypher does defensively sometimes. And it was really powerful play style that he was able to implement.
So you referenced the 2015 final, the one where, as you say, on paper you like aced the series, but as you say, like it's like that's I guess it's like the analogy I gave before, the boxer who's like going to take some shots to land them. Even if you win the fight, you're going to take some damage. That's the whole point of playing a guy like this. You know, you're not gonna get the early kills and then he just runs around getting yellows and loses the map 2-0. There's never been such a game against Evil. So the one everyone remembers though is obviously the next year after that, the last year of QuakeLive at QuakeCon, the epic final, which some people cite as the best of all time. I haven't quite made my mind up yet. I'll have to go and rank all these things, because the problem is obviously nostalgia from some of the other games might draw me away. I haven't decided yet. Definitely was an amazing final though, and this was one of those finals where, put it this way, when you said earlier that example of the 2013 final with Cypher, this is one of those finals where I do feel like whoever lost has to feel it inside, like, I should have won. And whoever won has to be like, it's a fucking great game. Like, it's a pretty amazing final, right?
Oh, yeah. That is probably the second most satisfying final that I've won. It was so difficult. I mean, and for, honestly, like, his mental fortitude, like that Elder game, that we were going overtime into overtime into overtime. And honestly, I should have had that game won. And then he somehow pulled off some ridiculous 5 rails in a row string together fight that like literally he had like 1% chance of coming back, and he did it. And he kept himself alive in that series. And then for him to like win Blood Run the way he did, because I had him down to like, I was up like 1 or 2 and had him down to 3 health, and he came back from that and ended up winning the map. And just, man, how close that series was, and like how it came down to on Furious Heights, and how narrowly like I pulled off the victory and he almost pulled it back again. Like how much we were pushing each other to play at our best. And I think it was, if you look throughout the tournament too, we had the way they set up the tournament that year and like previous years, the 4 best estimated players actually had to play a group stage at the beginning to determine seeding. Yes. They wouldn't just seed us like out the gate. We would play a group stage for seeding. So I already played him once. Then I played him in the upper bracket final. So I had already played him like 5 or 6 maps at this point, going into the final. And then I had to beat him again a 3rd time. And each set that we played, he got stronger and stronger. Like his shape was just, he was getting more comfortable on the setup. He was just playing more of his game. And something that he struggled with in a couple finals before was when playing against me compared to other players. Like, I think part of it was just my decision making and baiting him into certain fights, or not being baited into what he wanted to do, is not allowing him to play his game. But in that final, that was the best I've ever felt like his shape was. In that final, he was playing the best he ever played. And for the series to be that close and to win, like, and for it to technically, it might be the last QuakeLive final there ever will be, like, yeah, it was definitely super satisfying from my perspective to win that. And but yeah, if I would have lost, like, I would not have. I think it, like you alluded to, I would have had the same feeling like I did against Cypher in 2013 at DreamHack. Like, I literally put everything on the line and played so well that if he would have beat me, I would have just had to tip my hat to him. Like, yeah, he was playing phenomenally in that final.
What do you think, like, what would you say on this act? Because one of the things I have about Evil is, unlike all the other ones, I know all the other ones personally. Sometimes I've known some of them for years, so I've got like a knowledge to sense of their personality, but sometimes even, you know, what their perspective on a match or something. But the thing about Evil is, because he came around in the era where there weren't as many LANs, to me, he's just a complete black box. I have no idea how he thinks or what his mind state is. In fact, in a pure sense, I kind of like it, because I just get to watch him play in the game and go, fucking hell, he's amazing. Is he someone where Like, what was he like psychologically? Like, could he be broken in a game? Could you sort of like fuck with him a little bit? How did he tend to respond in that respect?
I think there was a game or two where, because he would like to, off of losing a frag, he would like to apply pressure right away. And if I could be ready for it and I could hit my shots and get like another free kill, it might tilt him into trying to do it again, which could snowball a lead for myself, and then I could potentially play a little bit more defensive and bait him into bad fights, because now he's gambled to get the control back and he's failed. So now it's like he's probably going to feel like he needs to keep doing it. And I think that's why, like, when him and I have played on fast maps, he has not done well historically. Like, even in the final I lost to him in DreamHack Winter 2012, on Hectic I like crushed him. Like, for something about fast maps, he did not play as well. Even though like his style was aggressive and his aim was so good, I think like if you just anticipated more of like what he could do in the dangers and being ready and constantly adapting your position, it's like there was more quick decision making that needed to be made, and you could potentially tilt him by getting a quick string of frags together and then getting full control. And on some of those maps, he wasn't as mentally strong as on the slower ones. Where like he was the player that found a way to play the slow maps fast, but he didn't do a great job of playing the fast maps fast, if that makes sense. And so I think just maybe based off map to map, if I could make him feel that way and be really oppressive, like something that he's not used to, like he's constantly used to beating these other players. Like if I could apply that type of pressure and play that well and I was feeling my own game, like I would definitely try to keep pushing it to the limit and make him feel like he couldn't come back into the game, and hopefully that mental state would carry over into the next map.
If people think about what it, like just visualizing to be a champion in a game like Quake, they would think that it's things like, right, well, I'm my game's tuned up, so I'm hitting all my shots. Like here's all the crazy shots I'd hit to win. Or I'm running this map perfectly. Like I've practiced it. I know what I'm doing. I execute these things. But one of the things about your career that I always found very interesting, but kind of satisfying, like narrative-wise, is if I had to pick someone to be in like an anime about Quake, only I would create this, obviously, a Quake dueling anime. Because obviously the thing about animes is they're all, because they're mainly for like 12-year-old kids, they are like that idea of you take a character, he's supposed to sort of represent the viewer, he goes through his journey, he has to come through. Yours would be the best one, because whereas some of these people, which would be great for an anime, by the way, because obviously if you exaggerated their style and their strengths, they'd be like monsters, titans and gods and all these forces of nature. And you obviously had to, with all these people, as people have heard the way you've mentally described how you'd take them on, you had to figure out with each one of them sort of like, you kind of had to get to know their strengths, like figure out what is this person good at, what actually do they do well, and then how do I try and use that against them, or make them how do I make that work for me, for example, like you're saying with the evil example, you want him to do the thing he actually, his natural impulse is, but then you want that to be the wrong thing for him.
Yeah, to turn it against him, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the thing is, the best analogy I'll give for this is when I first used to watch MMA, the UFC, obviously, like every casual player, I just wanted to watch like Anderson Silva or something where, they look like they're in the Matrix and it's the most amazing knockouts ever, or the guy who's just got the heavy hitter, he can knock anyone out, or a guy with a really cool, flashy style. But one of the people I ended up respecting the most was one of the people I actually hated to watch, which is George St. Pierre, because when you would watch him fight, he would actually have he was almost like an anti-fighter, because what you would do is just figure out the other person's strength, just try and negate it as much as possible using training, strategize to do exactly the thing that would annoy and frustrate that style the most, and then win by points. And at the end, you'd have to just go, well, I guess you are the best. You did win, so that guy couldn't do any of that shit against you. Did you, I don't want to push this analogy too far. Did you take some sort of perverse pleasure, though, in sort of like shutting all these guys down? Because when you won, a lot of it was like this, you would find a way to make that guy not be able to play his best game, which wasn't actually how everyone played Quake. Some people really would just go head to head and it'd be like, hey, let's see who hits 20 rails this game.
I don't know about perverse satisfaction, but I'd say there's definitely some
a wholesome satisfaction.
Yeah, there definitely is a good sense of accomplishment, because I've stated before in interviews before, like the only reason that the wins that I get feel that satisfying is because of how good the other players are, and to actually play at my best and to how much work I put into the game and like how hard I have to play to beat them because of how good they are, like there is definitely a satisfaction to that. And I feel like I would hope that if people have, beaten me in a final or whatever, that they feel that way. It's like a sense of respect, like I just have always looked at it that way. Like I have so much respect for other people's play styles and what they bring to the table, especially if it's something that I can't do. And yeah, I don't know, I've always really tried to work so hard at doing, like you just explained from GSP, like honestly doing the most annoying thing against them and completely trying to eliminate their game and shutting them down that way and making them feel as though they have no options. Like that's what I've always done. And yeah, I don't know.
Because even though when Cooler said many times the infamous, like, this is rapha or whatever, where he was trying to imply, which to be fair was like Cooler's go-to bread and butter excuse, which is like, they got lucky or they're just really lucky or like he seemed to at times, I think it was mostly out of frustration. Obviously he respected all these players and was friends with most of you anyway. Like I did sometimes, I even said to him once off camera after an interview like that, I was like, it is lucky, but to be fair, that's also pretty fucking good. Like it's not like everyone gets that luck and can do that, Like it's like that great. In fact, actually, it's a great line, obviously, that comes from. I think actually Zero Four might have said this in an interview, which was like that classic quote of like winners make their own luck. I think someone once asked him, if he was lucky, and he said something similar. It's kind of true, right? Like there's certain, put it this way, that luck didn't happen when fucking Kilson was playing against Cooler. He could have done with some of those moments where he would escape on one health. So. It's a mentality issue, right?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know. I've said it like even earlier. I think I had probably the best mentality out of all the players pretty much at every tournament of just not getting rattled and being the most composed because I knew I had to be. Like if I let any sort of tilt or slip up happen in my mental game and what I needed to do to focus, like I was just going to give the game away to them. Like I had to be on my best to beat them because of how good that they are. I can't give them anything for free. And I don't know. That's probably why, like, back to the other question, why was so satisfying to win certain finals is because of how hard I had to push myself and the fact that I was able to do that. It's like, it's different from like you win some online cup or something, doesn't matter that much. And you just kind of like, that wasn't that difficult. I managed to win. Like that's not that satisfying. Like what's satisfying is being pushed to your limit because of how good somebody else is and still somehow managing to be the one that won. Like you did it. Like you envisioned your future and you made it a reality type thing.
Okay, so as a last question to round out the evil topic then, let's go off what you just said there, because I will be very careful to phrase this like this. Since I said earlier that you can't just like play God with time and just be like, well, since a player was really good here years ago, maybe they could have been that good. Who knows? Because maybe they had to play that guy and maybe that guy was the hurdle they had to overcome to get so good by the end. But obviously the one area where, unlike all these other names we've mentioned, it does feel like Evil got a bit shortchanged is that the land circuit had dried up when he became amazing, when he really hit his prime. And then the few finals he was in, he was playing you every time. Like he didn't get the chance to play Cypher in 4 LAN finals when, as we say, in online cups, he was getting Cypher's number a lot of the time. So it might be a softball, but maybe you could speak to this. Unlike some of the others, he didn't get as many chances. If there'd have been like a proper circuit like we had in the IEM days, Evil would have a few championships, right?
I think if let's say hypothetically, IEM kept going from year to year up to 2016, I think he probably would have won at least one. I definitely think so, because I have a feel like between 2014 to 2016, it kind of felt like 2013. Like 2013 to 2016, you know how like there used to be the variants of the Avex Cypher cooler problem?
Yes.
It switched to Cypher would beat me, but I would beat Evil, but Evil would beat Cypher. So if it came down to some bracket where I just couldn't overcome Cypher or whatever, and Evil would manage to get to the final, like Evil was winning like 70 to 80% of the finals against Cypher online. and he was still imposing that kind of will on LAN. Like the one time Cypher did trump him was QuakeCon 2014. Cypher wiped the floor with him in like the upper bracket final or something, or the semifinals, and then went on to win that tournament. But when it came down to was it 2015 when it was the Trimasters thing? Like Cypher and Evil had to play, and it was like the winner of that got to face me, and Evil whipped him. Like there was the one map that Cypher won, it was like really close, but then the other two, like Evil gave Cypher absolutely no ins into the game and was totally dominant, and just kind of showed like that the results that he was getting online, etc., were still pushing through. And even if you look back at DreamHack Winter 2013, where I played Cypher in that final, guess who I had to play in the semis? I played Evil instead of it being flip-flopped on the other side with Evil playing Cypher. So it's one of those where if brackets go a little different, you don't know. You don't know what the results might have been. Right.
Obviously, we've done the 4 names. It's been a pretty good episode. I'm pretty sure, by the way, I can go ahead and say already, this is like Quake porn for anyone who likes duels. It's exactly what they want to hear. It's sort of topics you want to talk about. At the end, do you have like a final message for us, or do you want to thank anyone and say hello to anyone?
Just obviously thank you for Team Liquid. Continue to support me. Thank you for the interviews. It's always fun to do these, man. I hope we could come up with some more content to do in the future as Quake Champions keeps going on down the line. And just unfortunately, it's a 4-man list. There are some others I would have loved to have named, but like I said, I chose those because those are the players I felt pushed the game to the next level, as far as from Quake 3 to QuakeLive. And we'll see what holds with the future with Quake Champions, especially whether the duel format stays the same as it is now, or if it changes to like a time limit thing in the future and like more fluid with control than the round-based stuff now. And that'd be another topic in itself, like who was the best at this category and did it affect them going into the next? So yeah.
This video was kindly supported by Dean Tanglis, Gardner Wilson, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, Alex Adams, Eddie Wingfors, Daniel Yordanov, Robert Baxter, Travis Greb, Kyla Harris, James Harding, Cesar, and special thanks go out to Matt Shakowski and Jerky's Minion in particular. Want teasers for my upcoming content? How about asking me a question for my monthly AMA? Do you want to take part in a discussion about esports with me? How about suggesting a topic or a guest for my content? Put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today.